I don't know if anybody's watching this show uh, called You on Netflix, season four. Yeah, it starts with them talking about a Ted Chiang short story for the first I don't know five minutes or so. It's kind of just us, um, yeah, discussing Ted Chiang. Uh, yeah, so it's just kind of a funny coincidence. Never mind. Okay, so The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling by Ted Chiang. So Ted Chiang's a pretty interesting writer, at least to me. He has a computer science background, so he was originally a computer programmer. I think he still does kind of work in computer software and that kind of thing. You can probably see that coming through in his writing a little bit. Very kind of meticulous, very kind of logical. But his stories have a lot of complexity into them, and it's almost a kind of anxiety-provoking complexity because, at least for me, once I feel like I have a handle on some of his short stories or like I've solved it, whatever, I feel like it's slipping away from me once I reread it. That there is this whole other side that I'm not considering. So his writing is like very deceptively simple, or deceptively, yeah, because it has this kind of journalistic quality. But the ideas that are operating below the surface in these texts are very complex. And yeah, and I still don't really have a good feel for the meaning of a lot of his stories because, yeah, they have all this complexity. And he's also an interesting writer in terms of usually when a writer publishes successful short stories, they get asked to write a novel. Novels, you make more money selling novels, basically. So if you want to make it as a writer, yeah, you eventually write a novel because they make money. But he's writing career, even though people ask him to write a novel, it's not happening. So I guess he really likes that short story format. And he's also like, he's won a bunch of awards, Hugo Awards for science fiction. He even turned down an award that he won because he said the story wasn't good enough still. It's kind of like if I gave you guys an A plus on your essay and you're like, it's better if you don't grade me. It's not my best work. So pretty kind of cool move to do. Okay, so Ted Chiang, The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling. Genre is a little bit different. We've been reading a lot of stories kind of set in contemporary, in the present, or close to it. And we're reading the story set in the future, but how much in the future is really open to question, I think. So this story was written almost a decade ago, but we see so many of the kind of the future vision that he's laying out in the story represented today. So the daughter Nicole, um, yeah, she does this kind of writing, which is very different from the writing we're doing in this course, obviously, where we're doing on our laptops or pen and paper. Nicole, the father's daughter, and I have to keep calling him the dad because he doesn't have a name. It's another one of these characters that don't have a name. It's kind of annoying to talk about. But the dad's daughter, Nicole, writes purely visually, so just described here. I guess in this future they have kind of when you're looking, you have kind of a screen, and things pop up in like the corner of your vision. You can use your vision to write basically, and also your voice. So she sub vocalizes. I mean, it's a very interesting word. It's kind of like when you're speaking, but you're not actually. Yeah, so kind of like that. Okay, so that's kind of one of the elements of the future in this text, that they have this kind of visual technology, I guess, implanted into their eyeballs. And there's also this other technology where they're keeping life records, so recording everything. So like if you go to a class, depending on the university's privacy settings or everybody else's privacy settings, you're able to record. You can record the class, and maybe if you miss something, you can go back to that recording and watch it. Kind of like what we're doing right now. So but obviously, in both these technological innovations, we see so much of the present. People moving away today from writing, especially on pen and paper, and even from writing in general, like the high school system. And in America, they're moving away from writing essays toward doing kind of visual compositions, kind of going with the way that a lot of Gen Z, they're kind of, I think, more visual generation. So like working with TikToks and like, is that a form of writing? TikTok creation. I, yeah, it's open to debate whether that's still writing. um, yeah, and then also the life logs. So of course we see that a lot in the present today with live streams, people just recording their everyday lives on Instagram Reels, or basically even like stuff with like Facebook when you post a photo album. It's kind of a life log. You're recording your life and you're showing it to other people. So yeah, I just find it interesting, this vision of the future. Yeah, it's a lot like the present. I think it's a very believable vision of the future. And to be honest, I mean, I'd ask you guys if we were in person, what year you think the story is set in. But it's a really good kind of question. Like, what year is the story set in? Okay, so they use these two technologies that I previously mentioned to invent this technology called ReMem. So ReMem is basically you use your life record, so your life log, everything's recorded, and it's ReMem is basically a search engine. So you can find the memory that you're looking for in your life logs, and then you can watch that memory again. You can analyze it. So ReMem is at the heart of the story. I think it's a good question to think about whether you would want to use this technology. In certain ways, it would be great, obviously. In certain ways, you can see how it would be very bad. Yeah, if we were in person, yeah, it'd be good to think about yeah, whether you would use it or not. Like, what would be the consequences or what would be the advantages? Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today, why I think the story is so useful, is that in a lot of the stories that we've been reading so far, and also the way that you guys are responding to those stories, there is this kind of battle between techno optimism and techno pessimism. So techno optimism is kind of like what I previously called techno utopianism. So it's this idea that technology can save us basically from ourselves. And it's an idea or it's a belief that's been ongoing. So Rene Descartes, you might know him from the expression or the famous saying, "I think, therefore I am." A famous French philosopher believed that technology would make us masters and possessors of nature and help us triumph over most social and physical ills and even death itself. So in certain ways, that vision has come true. I mean, especially physical ills like technology, vaccine technology. Vaccine technology has helped us eradicate certain diseases and also, in some ways, get over COVID. Of course, it has made us, in certain ways, masters and possessors of nature as well. So technology, understood very broadly here, hasn't helped with death, but that's kind of like the final frontier. And there is kind of speculation that in some way, whether uploading all your tweets to some server, you can, through technology, conquer death. And we're going to see in a couple texts that are coming up this idea that, yeah, that technology can help you overcome death. So it's kind of a belief that's been going on for a while. We've also seen it in the text that we've read. So it's kind of Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, techno-utopian. Technology is going to save us. Social media is helping us connect. All these kind of things. And we see it in the characters in You'll Never Be Forgotten, specifically the rapist, who is one of these technological tech bros, basically. Okay, so then there's the other side. And yeah, so techno-pessimism. So there is the other kind of philosophers who are on the other side. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that, and kind of like the TikTok argument here, technological progress always involves more human and social regress than the progress is worth in our own physical abilities, which can become atrophied by technology, but also regress in our empathetic and moral abilities. So this idea, and you see it all the time today, that technology is destroying our bodies. We have that laptop kind of hunch. We don't have good posture anymore. I think technology has probably made us more fit with like step tracker. So maybe it's a little bit debatable, but especially with our moral and empathetic abilities, I think technology, yeah, a lot of people think that technology has damaged that, how much we can empathize, see things from another person's perspective, understand other people, and also act morally. So, yeah, well, I think is some validity to this perspective, and we see it all the time today, all the way that technology is ruining people. And even in your guys' own writing, a lot of you guys are kind of very techno pessimist, even though you use technology quite a bit. That, for instance, technology prevents us from showing our real selves to people, or yeah, that technology is like in the character of the male user in Distraction. It's destroying uh, his sense of romance, or something like that. So, and even in like the Tae Ping Chen's story, who I think she is a kind of a techno pessimist. We see these two characters whose lives in different ways are kind of, yeah, perhaps damaged by their internet fixations. And yeah, Taiping Chen says, yeah, there's a nihilism to the internet that that whatever you post on there, eventually it just will have no meaning, um, which is, yeah, pessimistic. I mean, I would place myself in this category usually. I get upset about people watching TikToks instead of reading books all the time. I get upset about children having iPads. Yeah, all this kind of stuff. So I'm on this side. So, but this is why the story's so great, because techno realism. So the kind of the sober perspective, not neutral, but one that kind of doesn't kind of have an emotional reaction to technology. So it isn't kind of like celebrating it. It's going to save us. Yahoo! It's going to help us live forever. Uh, and also like the very kind of negative reaction, like. Technology is ruining us. We should be scared of all the ways that it's damaging us. Chang provides, yeah, kind of a sober perspective, as these critics point out, Hughes and oh my God, Isakovitz. Yeah, that he acknowledges that technology has unintended side effects, but yeah, so that technology can change us in certain ways, but not all those changes are negative. And it's yeah. So okay, so looking at his whole collection, from which the short story that we're reading is taken from, so it's called Exhalation. So they find two kind of techno-realist themes to his writing. So more broadly, this whole collection, and as you might see in the book cover, he's got a blurb from one of the. I mean, if you could dream up who do you want to celebrate your book, who do you want to advertise it, Barack Obama is probably like the dream. So Barack Obama loved this book. If you didn't like Ted Chiang, well, you're gonna have to argue with Barack Obama, because he loves it. Okay, so yeah, so they point out two themes here, that technology is not merely a source of loss, of skills, of meaning, ways of life, of romance, of human connection, but also a context for moral and psychological regeneration, a means for keeping ourselves more honest and tool for better understanding ourselves and the world we operate in. So kind of the positive effects of technology, that there is some gain to it, some things that we do learn from using technology, in ways that we become even more human, rather than less human. So yeah, so this idea that technology does not fundamentally change human nature. So of course it changes what it means to be human, but it does not completely change human nature. So basic human tendencies are just kind of, yeah, technological change provides an avenue for expressing what we already were. So we take kind of the human being and all the questions that have haunted human beings across time, questions of uh, how to live a meaningful life, how to find a partner or a family, or friendship, what to do, like what to do about the idea that we're all going to die. These kind of questions that every human being in different ways, of course, has faced. These are still the same questions that every human being today faces, and it's not that different from human beings maybe thousands of years ago. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is good for me because sometimes when we're interacting with like Gen Z, we're sitting at a bar and one of them starts takes out their phone and starts video calling one of their other friends when we're at the bar. I'm like, are you an alien or something? Like, I don't know how to interact with you. You're not a human being. So, so it's good for me to know that, yeah, technology does not fundamentally change human nature. Just because younger generations use more technology than I did when I grew up, that doesn't mean they're aliens. We're still the same on some deeper level. So I think these are good things to keep in mind, and kind of help us kind of slide into these more emotional reactions of pessimism or just kind of utopianism, optimism. Okay, so just moving through the story, some of the kind of what I take to be the most important parts of it. It is a very kind of complex story, so it's hard to just focus on specific aspects of it. But one of the main kind of formal qualities of the text is that we have these two perspectives put together in the story. So we have the perspective of, it's a third person perspective, looking at Njingi and Mosby. Njingi is a Tiv, kind of set in Nigeria around kind of like the early 20th century. Yeah, then we have the other future setting set in, I don't even know where, North America. First person from the unnamed narrator's perspective, the dad. And yeah, what year it is a little bit open to question. So why are these two kind of very different settings placed together? Okay, so this is just one kind of answer to the student question, that Ted Chiang believes that the past and future are the same, and we cannot change either, only know them more fully. So in the story, we have a vision of the past, we have a vision of the future, and Chiang is kind of investigating both at the same time. It's only through understanding the past and understanding the future that we can behave in the present in kind of better or perhaps more human ways. And it's an interesting idea that he has, that the future cannot be changed. It's kind of like it's just coming. The future is coming, and we can have all these kind of resistance to technology, but the way that society is progressing right now, it seems like we're going to be having more and more and more technology. And rather than kind of just running away, becoming a Luddite, he says that we should just try to understand this future that is arriving beyond our control. And by mixing this vision of the past, this vision of the future, I do think it leads into what, yeah, Joshua Rothman calls this celestial feeling of of atemporality. So this mood or tone of things kind of not fitting in any kind of time scale, or things repeating across time, of these distinctions between the 1940s or whatever and the 2000, I don't know, 40s. Maybe they're about 100 years apart. There's not that much of a change. Some things are repeating across time rather than everything being new. Okay, so one of the effects that we get from this, from going to this 1940s story and being juxtaposed with a science fiction story, is that any technology, when it was arriving in a society, was a little bit like science fiction. It was kind of how we have all these reactions today to new technologies like TikTok or ChatGPT. People are freaking out about them. Well, yeah, phones were very freaky for people. Movies were very freaky. But even writing, so writing, what we're doing in this course, and it seems so hopefully natural, writing, like a basic part of being human being is writing, expressing yourself through writing, whether that's writing poetry or essays. But once writing was very strange. And we see that when the writing technology is being exposed to the TIV people. So we get this great description, and we have defamiliarization again here, where writing is described in this kind of very defamiliarized way by Njingi. He compares it, he used the analogy of like a farm field. And it's a very kind of weird description of writing, but this is how you kind of interpret things when you don't really understand them. They are very strange when they arrive, and even writing was a strange technology once. Okay. But again, technology, just because we're doing this kind of technology, is kind of inevitable. Sorry, there's a hummingbird That's not my window. It's looking. I mean, okay, technology isn't neutral at the end of the day. So there still are some kind of political movements behind this technology. It's not just kind of a neutral thing. So when this technology is being introduced, it comes with a content or a message as well. So Mosby spread open the sheaf of paper and gestured toward it. Have you heard the story of Adam? He asked. Adam was the first man. We are all children of Adam. So right here, we have the juxtaposition of paper, of writing, and this content, this religious European content that's being pushed along with the technology. So we see that with Silicon Valley today too. Like they invent these new technologies, but there's politics behind them as well. There's visions of what it means to be human, yeah, behind these new technologies. Okay, so we also have, we just talked about how technology doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're losing things, but there is still an element of loss here, and it's specifically indigenous culture. And here we have kind of the European colonization of Africa, but of course this very similar happened where we are today in Canada, and there is a massive loss associated with this course, with a course about writing and reading. This course is about writing and reading, and these are both technologies. Um, and they have replaced technologies that existed or arts that existed before. So today, when we think about reading and writing, we think about your laptop, you're writing Microsoft Word, you're writing about somebody else's writing, usually some kind of fiction or whatever. But there used to be other forms of reading and writing. So in the story, they kind of allude to that. So talking about Gebegba, he was able to look at the ground and know what had happened, even though he had not been present. This is a kind of reading. So this kind of indigenous reading of the land. So reading of the land in terms of knowing what kind of weather is coming, or what kind of animals have passed through your territory. Or just signs of the future that are arriving. It might seem kind of spiritual or abstract, but this was an art or technology of reading, indigenous art of reading, that has been eradicated by the replacement of our idea of writing today. That we don't, in a university class, we don't go out and read the landscape. We don't go out and track animals. We read stories, and of course, I love reading stories. I love reading and writing, but there are other forms of reading and writing that have been replaced so that we can have this kind of university class today. There's also kind of the loss when something is written down. You kind of lose the actual experience, as Chijingi says in this kind of quote on the side. And then we have, yeah, so Europeans in this bottom corner. Europeans often believe paper over people as the source of truth. And we see that specifically, especially in the Canadian context. So when, basically when Europeans were stealing land from Indigenous people, they said, you need to prove to us that you've lived here for as long as you said you have. And of course, they had Indigenous peoples had different forms of evidence than what Europeans trusted as evidence. So they had stories, they had totems, they had all kinds of art to measure or to record the passing of time, and didn't fly with the Europeans who wanted paper as evidence, and we see that today. Paper, leave a paper trail. Yeah, so believe this tendency of believing paper over people. Of course, there is some benefits to that, but there's also a massive loss that we have to kind of grapple with, I think. And the story encourages us to grapple with. Okay, so so because we're moving toward this comparative essay, just looking at these two stories, these two perspectives, what are some similarities between them? So both stories have this kind of skeptical protagonist, Chijingi, and the dad, who are skeptical of a new technology. Oh, it's going to be bad for us. But they eventually become drawn to its power and start using it. And both of them, when they're using this technology, it has a profound effect on their sense of identity. And eventually, they both have to decide whether to process the past through fact or through feeling. Which one is the better one? But at the same time, there's some differences here, and they're important differences. And some of this gets a little bit complicated, but it is interesting. So, in the TIV story, the transition is from a society built on oral culture, non-recorded stories, to a written culture, or there's more recording on paper. In the Remem story, the transition is from an individual built on oral culture, so non-recorded stories, to a written culture. So what exactly this means is that we all have these kind of stories in our head that we tell ourselves over and over again, stories that make up our identity. And for example, like maybe in grade 5, I won a science fair, and then I keep telling myself the story over and over again. It gives me an aspect of my identity. Maybe I'm smart. Maybe I'm good at science. And I tell the story, or I remember it. I rewrite it. I return to it. It's not recorded, so there's no video of this me winning the grade 5 science fair. But yeah, it's a story that I keep telling to myself because it does form an important part of my identity. But this is being changed by the Remem technology, that now all your memories will be recorded. They'll be recorded on some server somewhere. So they'll be written down, basically. You can go back and access them. So it's not so much that I'm telling myself stories of the past then. I would just go back to grade 5 science fair and rewatch that because there would be a written record of it. So there is a kind of massive change there. And yeah, and then this is where this story gets really complicated, and I like to talk about it in person because it's more confusing than I can just kind of sum up. But just as a simple version of the ending, Jijingi chooses to process the past through feeling rather than fact. He follows his elder. He ends up burning all of his writing because he realizes that the TIV way is to trust people over paper, people's judgments over what paper says. And then the dad kind of does the opposite, but I don't know if it's as clean as this. So the father chooses to process the past through fact rather than feeling, following his daughter. So he uploads all his memories to some public server, and anybody can watch them. And he also kind of does this investigation into his past through the facts recorded by Remem technology. Okay, I think it is a little bit more complicated than this, that I'm painting it, but I'll get too rambly if I try to get too deep into it. The main trouble I'm having with this kind of simplistic reading is whether recording something constitutes fact. And what I mean by that is just like, I mean, we see it in like sports today. Sports have like instant replay, so they record everything. And then they use instant replay to try to determine what actually happened. So the fact, not the feeling of the referee, the facts. But when these referees watch these recordings, they still make mistakes, and there's still a lot of ambiguity in terms of the calls. Like, it's not obvious just because something's being recorded what the facts of the matter are. Then they could probably just have some computer do it. But yeah, so it's just I mean, and even like, I keep coming back to this story just because it was something that I really looked into. But like the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp's trial. There was a lot of their lives already recorded. There's all these clips, recording of their text messages, them recording each other. So again, the future of the story is not very far off. But even with these recordings, there's so much interpretation of what these recordings meant, specifically the one of Johnny Depp and his finger or something like that. So I'm having So that's just kind of, I'm still kind of struggling with it, obviously. But I won't talk too long just so this video doesn't go too long. Okay, so just some takeaways from the story that I think are valuable to this course. That our thoughts and identities have been technologically mediated for a long time. So the story starts with this techno-pessimistic perspective from the dad that once we have this Remem technology, we'll become cognitive cyborgs. We'll become robots, basically. We'll become computers. But by the end of the story, he has a bit of a change of perspective. So by seeing that writing is a technology, he sees that we have been technologically mediated for a very long time. We've been robots in certain ways as soon as we learned how to read, how to write. This is a form of technological mediation. And I just think it's an important point because, like, usually today we think of like social media as like our fake self. And then when we think of like, what is my real self? Well, I think of like writing. So like when I write, I feel like I'm expressing myself. I feel like when writing poetry or writing an essay, I feel like I'm self-expressing. But writing, writing is a technology too. So in a certain way, when we think about our real selves, it's just kind of, we think of that in terms of older technologies of the self rather than some kind of core to our being. Okay, so this one is more related to this text, but that both approaches to the past, subjective and objective, have their own distinct benefits and consequences. So when you're just being subjective, so you're just being me, as the TIV call it, you end up in the kind of the situation of the dad who has this very subjective understanding of the past, a subjective understanding of the past that has hurt his daughter, and that Remem, with its objective approach, perhaps helps him get over. But then we have the opposite message in the Tiv story where uh, he Jijingi chooses the subjective approach over the objective. So what do we do with that? Well, my interpretation of the story's theme, this techno realist theme, is that yeah, sometimes we have to turn away from technology and search inside, do some kind of soul searching, whatever that means, to kind of find ourselves. It's what Jijingi does. He burns his writing and he kind of investigates his own feelings, who he should side with, the Europeans or the TIV. Um, but other times we do have to turn to technology and search there to find ourselves, do some kind of soul searching on Google. Um, and kind of the main message here is that, yeah, technology, it doesn't just destroy the human soul, the human spirit, but it's compatible. It's compatible, meaning that it can open up new avenues of human expression, of humans dealing with themselves, that can make us more human in certain ways. Yeah, which I think is an important lesson, rather than just kind of technology making us less human or dehumanizing us, that it can also humanize us.